Next on News Talk, AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show with Kevin Doran.
Brian O'Neill in for Kevin Doran again. Congressman Tom Reed is our guest today. Normally on Thursdays, it's Dr. Christian Koff. Koff was on yesterday's show so that we could have the congressman on today. Congressman Reed, thanks for joining us.
No, thanks for having us on, Brian. Appreciate it.
Congressman Reed, the topic today, Obamacare. For the last few weeks, the publicity, most of it surrounding Obamacare in New York State is that it's gone better in New York State than in other states because New York State had its insurance exchange running well. But we understand from your press secretary that you have a lot of complaints from this congressional district, the new 23rd congressional, from voters who say it has not gone well for them. In fact, this problem in New York State was just talked about the other day on the Sean Hannity show.
Because I got a letter from a friend of mine yesterday who has a big company I've been telling you about, and he got that letter that said, oh, by the way, your insurance is canceled as of June. By the way, good luck on the New York City exchange.
Now, we saw on your Facebook page, you say you've had something like, 350 complaints from people who have had problems in this district?
Yeah, approximately. Yeah, we're hearing a lot of stories, and because this isn't about a website. This isn't about having an exchange up and running technologically speaking. This is about policy implications that we're seeing people that have reached out to us by the hundreds, saying how they've lost their coverage, their premiums are going through the roof, how they're not being given the same type of coverage, the health care that they were promised they could keep, as the president infamously said. And to me, this is just another example of why this law is not good for Americans, and we remain opposed to it.
Can you give us any specifics?
Yeah, I will tell you, I had a gentleman from the Corning area by the name of Tom who had their health care canceled by their provider, and the closest replacement plan they could get showed a premium increase of 32.8%. Then they had to go to a high deductible plan, an individual deductible of $5,500, which is much more than they otherwise had under their prior plan. I had Susan from Hornell, call the office, and she indicated she was diagnosed with a serious disease in February 2013, and then they're getting a letter from their insurance as of January 1st, 2014. Their insurance is going to be canceled. Now they're going to have to go out and shop around, and it went from $364 to $607, and it doesn't provide the same type of coverage like their prior policy. That's a significant out-of-pocket expense that Susan's going to have to face, and for coverage, that's not in a situation where she's facing health needs today in 2014. Those are the kind of stories that Susan and Tom are telling me that I am referring to. That this is the train wreck that Max Baucus indicated was coming down the tracks. Max Baucus being the head of the Senate Finance Committee on the Democratic side, that we're seeing unfold right before our eyes.
What about businesses? You have talked before about small business owners. Anything new there in the horror story department?
Yeah, there are. I mean, there's businesses like you just played the quote from, I believe it was the Hannity show about the business going into the New York City exchanges. But we're hearing that too. We're hearing small businesses getting premium notices of we're going to cancel the policies and the premiums are going to go up. And the worst of that is yet to come, Brian, because in my opinion, this is just the tip of the iceberg. By the president delaying the business mandate by a year, by executive order, he set it up so that in the summer of 2014, I've talked to some carriers and representatives of carriers. They're like, that's when we're going to put our notices out because our businesses are going to demand to know what their costs are for the upcoming year. And people are going to get notices in their employer-sponsored plans of 30, 40% increases potentially, which is going to mandate that they not provide insurance because they can't afford it. That's killing our business community, and that's another reason why this is bad policy for America.
CNN has a new poll out just a few days old. Your take on that, Congressman?
We looked at that poll, and I saw, the overwhelming consistency of the responses. 62% of Americans oppose the law. 63% of the Americans believe it's going to add to the cost of health care in America. That should tell us something. That as elected officials, we should be listening to the American people and doing something about this policy that is hurting so many Americans. And, just take, for example, Brian, just to drill down a little bit into the weeds, I'm very concerned. I've heard from volunteer firefighters how Obamacare is going to treat volunteer firefighter companies as mandated requirers of health insurance for those volunteers under the law. And we dropped a piece of legislation to make it clear that the volunteers would not be covered or mandated to provide health insurance. Because when we talk about our fire departments, when we talk about our emergency responders, to saddle them with that type of mandate from Washington, D.C., and that type of cost is going to hurt one of the backbones of our area, our district, and that's our volunteers that are taking care of our needs when it comes to firefighting and law enforcement.
Now, you're co-sponsoring this bill. Let me get this straight. It blocks employers of volunteer firefighters, the companies that, hire the volunteer firemen and women, emergency responders at the workplace. This legislation would prevent employers from having to list the workers who are volunteer firefighters or emergency workers as full-time employees so that they can avoid the Obamacare employers mandate?
That's right. It's how the law has been interpreted out of Washington, D.C., where they're looking at some of the perks and benefits that volunteers receive as part of their volunteer service. And they're saying, well, that qualifies them as potential employees of the fire departments, of the volunteer fire districts, and therefore those districts and departments are now mandated to provide health insurance. And we wanted to make sure that we are clear legislatively. That's why I dropped the legislation and sponsored legislation to say, no, that's not the intent. That is not something we're going to put on our volunteer firefighters and law enforcement agencies because they just can't afford it. And we're talking about volunteers, for Pete's sake.
Congressman Reed, let me get this straight. It's mandated by Obamacare that if the employers drop the volunteer firefighters or volunteer emergency workers, it's insurance. It's mandated by Obamacare that the volunteer fire departments pick up the insurance?
Yeah, what it does, it gets into the determination of whether a volunteer is an employee for the purposes of Obamacare and the mandate requirement. And there are proposals and interpretations coming out of Washington to say, because of the nature of the volunteer makeup of these fire departments and these fire districts, they're going to consider, they being Washington, D.C., going to consider them employees, and then therefore the fire departments and fire districts are mandated to provide health insurance to those individuals. And to me, that is just something that is going to saddle these volunteer organizations with costs and requirements that they just can't comply with, and further jeopardizes the ability to attract and retain this backbone of law enforcement and firefighter services that we need in our communities.
We're talking with Congressman Tom Reed on a Thursday morning. Congressman, the other day you sent out a statement about the Obamacare 834 forms. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here. The 834 forms, from what I understand, are the forms that you fill out online when you're signing up. These forms are processed by government employees and then sent over to insurance companies. The statement that you sent out the other day says the government workers have been making a lot of mistakes on these 834s. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, and we're trying to get clarification from the agencies and CMS to see exactly where this data is going, how the data, how effective and accurate the data is, and where the data is going. Because this 834 is the exchange behind the scenes between the intake information that people are filling out on these exchanges and that go to the carrier. Because you got to remember the payments, the subsidies that people refer to as making Obamacare affordable and accessible, they go directly to the insurance carrier. So there's a financial need that the government has to get the money over to the carriers, and the carriers and the government are communicating through these forms and these documents. 834 is an example of it. And there are potential breaches of personal privacy that I'm very concerned about, that we're hearing anecdotally concerns of. And we want to make sure that system's working and that these personal privacy protections are fully in place.
Can you expand a little bit on what the concerns are?
Yeah, no, it's just people are concerned that somehow information is getting out, and that's where we got to lock down to see exactly where that information is going, and see who's getting access to it, how it's being compiled, and that's why I hesitate to give out anything anecdotally. We want facts, we want data, and that's what this press release and this effort on the 834 spotlighting that issue is all about. And if anybody, and for that matter, if anybody's concerned about that, if they could reach out to us at the office at read.house.gov of any personal experiences they have in your listenership, we're definitely eager to hear from them.
Congressman Tom Reed is our guest today. Brian O'Neill in for Kevin Doran. When we get back, we'll continue our conversation about Obamacare. Congressman Tom Reed on the line today. He's the congressman for the new 23rd Congressional District. It used to be known as the 29th, but it was redistricted on the map. It goes from, from Jamestown to Ithaca to just south of Rochester, Congressman?
It goes, essentially, and then we go over to Geneva, Seneca Falls, and Owego in Tioga County.
Congressman, during your weekly press calls, you get asked every question short of, have you stopped beating your wife lately? I sit there with my telephone muted, sometimes laughing out loud at the bias or the anger coming out of mostly the Beltway guys, the Beltway reporters. You can just hear it in the questions. It's like nothing you would have heard on a Congressman Randy Cool press call or a Congressman Eric Massa press call. In fact, one time a reporter from Canandaigua, I don't know if you know this or not, a reporter from Canandaigua asked Nate Shinagawa when Shinagawa was running, during one of Shinagawa's weekly press calls, how to ask you, Congressman Reed, a question, how to phrase the question. Then, at your next press call, that reporter, repeated the question practically word for word the way Shinagawa said. Now, the Beltway reporters, that's just one example. The Beltway reporters are always coming up with stories about you, trying to bring you down. They're usually, I can't even call them mini scandals. They're like non-stories in most places. These are all guys outside the congressional district who don't cover you going around in the town hall meetings. These are D.C. guys. It's never ending. In radio, I'd almost call it, the tune-out type stories. The only thing I can compare it to would be the Sam Donaldson press conferences back in the 1980s where he would hammer on President Reagan endlessly. And the big thing of it is, these questions are asked during intense news weeks when there's big stories going on. And the reporters keep going back, for the nitpicky Beltway guys, keep going back to these obnoxious questions, completely missing the point of the big story of the day. Now, getting back to Obamacare, TheWeek.com is reporting that there is no truth to the allegations that the House and Senate are exempt from Obamacare. What the writer says on TheWeek.com is that both houses of Congress are not exempt, that the members of Congress are treated differently than other people are, that members of Congress are actually treated worse than the average person, but they are not exempt. Your take, Congressman Reed, on that statement and that story from TheWeek.com.
Yeah, this is something that we're familiar with, and it's a spin coming out of Washington, D.C. And it's also spin that they're trying to use, as you say, the attack campaigns that are out there with media. I wasn't aware of that planted question by my prior opponent to media that the media followed up on verbatim and asking me in a subsequent press conference. It's frustrating to hear, but I know it's part of the game. And we just we're not afraid of any question. We're accessible. We're open. We take the hits as well as we can. But what they're talking about is that we as members of Congress are mandated to go into the Obamacare exchanges, which I agree. That's what the law is. That's what their law requires. And then when we go into the Obamacare exchanges, we have to purchase it through the D.C. Health Exchange. The difference, the special treatment, if you would, is that members of Congress are the only ones in America that are allowed to receive a contribution from their employers to offset the insurance policy that they're required to get through Obamacare. Now, I disagree with that. Now, I am taking that subsidy, if you would, that different treatment, personally, because I want to make sure that when I advocate and talk to people about removing that special treatment for Congress, I can't sit there and be called a hypocrite for saying, well, this isn't going to impact you. You're not going to suffer anything financially as a result of it. I am going to suffer financially as a result of my endless campaign to get rid of this special treatment for Congress. Also, when you talk about what Senator Ron Johnson is doing, in order to have legal standing to challenge this determination of this difference treatment for members of Congress, you got to show to the court that you're going to suffer a financial harm as a result of the action that you're proposing on taking. This puts me in a position to join that lawsuit and to say to the court, I am asking to have this special treatment, this different treatment for members of Congress that no other member of the American public get, as they are in the Obamacare exchanges, and I'm going to suffer financial harm as a result of it. So I now have standing in front of the court to make that argument. And what you're hearing coming out of D.C. is the spin, that this is just an employer contribution to their health care. And that very well could be the case, but we are different than any other employee in America, in that no other employee in America can get this contribution by their employer as part of an Obamacare exchange. That's the treatment that needs to be rectified, that needs to be repealed, and we need to be treated. Either treat us just like every other employer and employee in America, or go the other way and just say that everybody else in America gets treated just like members of Congress get treated. To me, that's the preferred path.
Congressman Tom Reed is our guest today. Congressman Reed, when you were running for the House, one of your opponents said that you were going to, one of your opponent's assistants, I should say, said you were just going to be another establishment Republican, but you have not been. You've aligned yourself with the Tea Party and taking a lot of heat for those stances. It reminds me, the comparison of what someone I know always says about Rush Limbaugh. He says, you shouldn't carry Rush on your station because he's not a real conservative. He's just a mouthpiece for the GOP. And I say, well, I'm in the studio writing news when Rush Limbaugh shows on the air, and I heard Rush go after John McCain endlessly during the McCain campaign and speaking dismissively of Mitt Romney sometimes during the Romney campaign. So how does that make Rush a GOP stooge when he's going after their presidential candidates on his show? Bringing me to the next soundbite, I wanted you to get your take here, Congressman Reed, on what Limbaugh says here about Obamacare.
The IRS is going to end up playing an ever larger role in everybody's life. 3 to 5 years down the road, if something isn't done about this, it's going to be something you're not going to want to put up with. Your health care isn't going to be any better. Medicine isn't going to be any better. It's not going to be any more efficient. It isn't going to be cheaper. None of the things that Obama promised you are going to come true. Your premiums aren't going to go down. Your deductible isn't going to go down. You're not going to be able to keep your doctor. You already know this. You can't keep your plan. You already know this.
Congressman Reed, kind of like Rush Limbaugh, you're one of the original critics of Obamacare. Your take on what Limbaugh said just there?
Yeah, I think he's going right down exactly the concerns I have. We've already seen the promises the president has made not come to be accurate, not be truthful. The lie of the year, as it was called out by, I think it was PoliticoFact or whatever the organization was. And to do it in a way, the president did it in a way where he knew it wasn't true, in my opinion. And when he said it, he just kind of kept doing the political spin and just kind of the attitude of Washington, D.C., just say it enough and people will believe it. And we're seeing that that's not the fact. And the bigger concern, too, that Rush doesn't talk about in that video or that message that you just played, I see it over the horizon. My opponent, for example, Martha Robinson, wants to get to a single-payer healthcare system in America. That is where single payers means the federal government pays, controls, mandates, has all facets of oversight on healthcare delivery in America. Single-payer healthcare is being tried in Vermont now. They're trying to go down that path. It's more government. It's essentially Obamacare isn't far enough for my opponent, Martha Robinson, supporting a single-payer type healthcare. That's the next step in this debate, if I'm looking down the road a year, 2, 3 years, that they're trying to bring us to. And my opponent, for example, Martha Robinson, supports single-payer and wants us to get there sooner than a year, 2 or 3 years down the road. To me, that's going to be a clear distinction between myself and her as how we approach this issue. She wants more government. I want to empower individuals, patients, and doctors in healthcare relationships rather than bureaucrats out of Washington, D.C., or the insurance carriers. I think if we go down that path, we're going to get to some solutions that are going to deal with our healthcare needs in America in a way that respects the privacy of it and respects the individual patient-doctor relationship that needs to be promoted and expanded upon.
And one final question. I really have to admit I have not done enough with this story on the news because we've been swamped with cancellations and closings and weather stories. Your IHEAP legislation, can you tell us about that, Congressman?
Yeah, the LIHEAP legislation is another example, and we've had some success on this issue that we carried some water on in the last 2 years. The formula for how LIHEAP, low-income heating assistance program, for people that are of low income and trying to get assistance with their heating bills, has expanded since the 80s when it was originally promoted and put into law to be a general energy assistance program where people down south and up north are essentially tapping into these funds in equal ways. And what we're trying to do is reform the formula to get back to the original intention of the program, and that is where states that suffer cold weather conditions, such as we're experiencing here today in upstate New York, western New York, that they get a preference for these dollars for our low-income needs, because heating isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. And we allocate, and this would be about $100 million additional money is an estimate we've seen to New York State alone because of the cold weather nature we have versus states like South states like Texas and elsewhere that we shouldn't have in this program to the extent that they're getting the benefits they receive.
Always great having you on, Congressman.
Well, thanks so much, Brian. You stay warm. Brian, you stay warm. Brian, you stay warm.